Okay, so I am Kim Raine, and I am an academic, but I'm actually going to present this from the perspective of an advocacy organization. I am a founding member and a member of the leadership team of the Alberta Policy Coalition for Chronic Disease Prevention, which was initially formed as an approach to take lessons learned from tobacco control and apply them to physical activity and nutrition. I'm also the past president of the Alberta Public Health Association, which is an advocacy organization as well. So that's the approach I'm coming from. So one area where I have found a lot of help is looking at the Conflict of Interest Coalition. When judging partnerships, conflict of interest is the key. And this is a direct quote from the statement of the Conflict of Interest Coalition that was presented to the high-level meeting of the United Nations back in September of 2011. Since the major causes of preventable death are driven by diseases related to tobacco, poor diet, physical inactivity, and alcohol drinking, the endorsers of the statement are concerned about the overuse of the term partnerships without any clarification of what this term means. We remain concerned that public-private partnerships in these areas can counteract efforts to protect and promote public health. So, are all partnerships bad, or are all partnerships good? I think there's a way that we might be able to develop clear policies and codes of conduct to identify risk and guide our ethical decision-making. So just to demonstrate, I'm using the sponsors of the Canadian Obesity Network Summit, or the National Obesity Summit. And the Conflict of Interest Coalition talks about pingos and bingos. Pingos are public interest non-governmental organizations, and I have circled those that are the sponsors of this summit. Bingos are business interest non-governmental organizations. Now, business interest non-governmental organizations, or bingos, have the primary responsibility to maximize profit. And there are many bingos listed on this list of sponsors. Some, it's very, I'm not going to make a judgment right now as to where there's a conflict of interest. Some may have a conflict of interest, some may not. I'll ask you to consider where there might be a conflict of interest. What is dangerous territory is dingoes. Not just because they eat your babies. But dingoes are bingos who masquerade as pingos. And I would argue that we have a few examples of dingoes on our list. And I'll ask you to think about that. So from my perspective as an advocate for public health, I'm not averse to public-private partnerships per se, but I am concerned with conflict of interest, whether that be real or perceived. Even perceived conflict of interest is a problem, as well as risk to organizational credibility and unintentional mission drift. So I'll ask you, what is the impact of bingos or dingoes on CON's credibility and mission? And I'll just remind you, the mission of the Canadian Obesity Network is to act as a catalyst for addressing obesity in Canada and to foster knowledge, translation, capacity building, and partnerships, not defined what kind of partnerships, very loosely, among stakeholders so that researchers, health professionals, policymakers, industry's always been part of the mission, again, not defined or specified what kind of industry, so, and other stakeholders, they may develop effective solutions to prevent and treat obesity. I come from the population public health side of things, so my focus is on prevention, and I would argue that some of the bingos and dingoes on the list may not be working to promote this mission, especially around the issue of prevention. So I think it's very important for the Canadian Obesity Network to think about who they are open to business for. When it comes to some of the lessons that we can learn from tobacco control, it's important to recognize that we should not support endorsing any products or partnering with any company that opposes prevention efforts in any way. And that includes hindering advocacy For example, there are ongoing efforts now that you will hear about in this summit, as well as some off-site sessions that are being held in correspondence on advocacy to regulate harmful marketing. We know that there's evidence on marketing to children, and we also know that pricing practices are issues and taxation are issues as well. I'm getting the sign from Diane to finish up, so that's why I put in her favorite slide. So, people who argue that the tobacco issue is not one that we should compare to because obesity is more complex. But just because no single industry is at fault doesn't mean there is no fault. When there is evidence of contribution to the complex problem, there is justification for not entering into partnerships. And I think we have evidence of contribution. I'll just quickly talk about the idea of food industry's playbook, which came from an article by Brownell and Warner on the perils of ignoring history. Some of the strategies in the food industry playbook, taken from the tobacco industry playbook, is the idea of emphasizing physical activity over diet, the focus on personal responsibility, being able to control your portions or count your calories, and characterizing critics as the food police. We are seeing these actions happening. Would a cancer control conference accept tobacco industry funding? No. The need for money to advance our cause does not justify accepting funds from organizations that counter our efforts. And I think we have to start thinking of innovative ways to address funding, such as PINGOs, health promotion foundations that are funded by tobacco taxes, alcohol markups, or sugar-sweetened beverage taxes. We need to protect policy from commercial industry, from commercial interests. Industry can be part of the solution and should be engaged in implementing policy, but can't be involved in the policy development, as public health policy must be protected from commercial interests.